Hello and welcome to the new edition of Vieco.live. I hope that you had a nice week between this session and the last session, and that everything is fine with you, that Corona is not getting to you, and that you're ready for a new dose of controlledins. This week is going to be controlledins, and it's going to be a topic that I have wanted to cover for a long while. So the topic is resident controlledins, and let's take a look at what resident controlledins are. Resident controlledins are such controlledins which would remain available at all times while you are working in Business Central. So when I blogged, it was a few months back, about possible ways of replacing .NET. One of them was to stuff .NET into WebAssembly, to load that WebAssembly and store it in a resident controlledin, and then be able to invoke that. This approach has its limitations, and it's not the topic of today, but this is one of the ways of explaining what resident controlledins are. Also, resident controlledins are something that a lot of people usually ask me during my controlledins trainings and classroom seminars. A big problem is that I have been planning to deliver either a blog post on that or a session on it for a long time, and then when I started preparing for that, actually I hit a wall, and this is why there is a big question mark with today's session. So I'm actually not sure if this is. Let me just make sure that once again that this is fully live, because there is nothing happening in the chat. And yeah, it seems that, let me just type something. Okay, so yeah, it's difficult, you know. I have 4 screens in front of me, and it's have to figure out what's happening where, and yeah, it's anyway. So let's take a look at why controlledins are a bit of a problem, and then let's take a look at what we can do with them and what we cannot do with them. So how would I approach creating a resident controlledin? So the first thing about a resident controlledin is that it has to be available at all times. So it means that no matter where you are in Business Central, this controlledin has to be alive. And this control being alive is what makes it resident. So how would I approach that? Obvious approach is to actually put it in a control center. And this is what I have done. So let's take a look at what I have here for my code. So I have one simple controlledin. This is called resident. It has 2 scripts and a style sheet. I will talk a little bit more about the scripts and all. Style sheet is just to present something visible on screen. And then I have some sizing and sizing definition. And then I have a couple of events on control ready, which is a usual suspect. If you have followed what I've done and said about controlledin, you always need to have this one. And then I have an on key pressed. So my demo today is going to be a key listener. So let's imagine that you want to have a key listener which sits residently in the front end and listens to keystrokes, and then is able to notify you when there is a key pressed. Pretty interesting. And then I have a procedure start listening, by which I tell to the front end that AL is now ready to start listening, and I have a procedure update, which is here just to indicate something pretty late in this session. I'm going to use this one to actually indicate what's happening when you communicate with the resident controlledin. It just doesn't mean anything yet. Then I have this resident page, which right now doesn't have anything at all. It doesn't even subscribe to this trigger. And this one is actually just to present my controlledin on screen. And then I have included this resident controlledin, actually this page part, in my role center. And then I have my startup. This is startup script which will run when everything loads in the browser. I will call initialize. This initialize will actually just draw an indicator on screen. this getAL method function, it's the function that you have seen from my couple of last sessions of on control-ins. So this is actually my wrapper for Microsoft Dynamics Nav get environment function. So I'm just going to collapse that so that it's out of the way so that we can focus on what is happening here. So if I run this, let's run this and see what happens. Yeah, it's wrong screen, so let me actually wrong browser. So echo.live. I'm just making sure that my Business Central actually loads on this screen. So I'm going to do this again. Still not the correct one, but yeah, I'm just going to put this here, and then I'm going to use that one. Doesn't matter. So I'm going to sign in, and then first thing that I want to show is something very bad about control-ins, and this is something that has happened in Business Central 170. I have this issue with my license. I mean, it's not an issue, I'm going to update that. But I've left it here for two reasons. First, because I want to stress out the problem that we are currently having with control-ins in Business Central 170, which wasn't present before. And the second is because I couldn't actually take care of the license because I would have to reinstall Docker. My last update of Docker yesterday actually broke it. So I was nearly canceling today's session, and then I managed to somehow make it run, and I hope it will run until the end of the session. And I have to reinstall Docker because I have no access to my Docker using PowerShell at this point for whatever reason, but never mind, Waldo will know. So let's take a look at what this problem is with the control-ins. That's number one reason why I left this message here. I actually have blogged about that, or actually not blogged, but I have created I've created an issue on on GitHub AL page, and I have created on my own GitHub reproduction or repro steps for this problem. The problem is as follows. On Business Central 170, when there is a message during initialization, and it doesn't matter where this message comes from, if it happens during initialization of your session, if you load the control-in on that page which causes this to happen, that control-in will not be able to talk to the backend. We will see that pretty soon, how this communication is simply stopped because of this message. So this is a bug. Microsoft has confirmed that this is a bug. They also said, I mean, at least their page here says that it's in progress, but we have to wait until a fix is released. So we will see this bug in action today a lot. It will annoy us a lot, but yeah, it is something that we have to live with currently in BC 170. So my control-in is actually present here. The only thing that it does right now is it renders this small, actually not that small, gray circle. I'm going to actually color this circle into green. I want to do some more stuff. From my startup, I first want to initialize a on control ready event, and then I want to invoke it. So I'm invoking AL and triggering a trigger here on control ready. And what I want to do from here is I want to say to control, okay, I'm ready to start listening to your key presses. So I'm going to do cur page.resident, that's the name of my control-in, and then start listening. Of course, I have to implement this function here in my resident.js file. So I'll have to create a global function called start listening. And then inside of that, for now, what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to color the indicator to green, and this will showcase this bug with Business Central immediately. So let me just stop the session. I'm stopping it, and then I'm going to just do indicator dot class name is indicator on. So this will color it to green, and what will happen? My startup will call on control ready in my page. My page on control ready trigger will receive a call. It will know that it's now safe to talk to JavaScript. Then it will call JavaScript and say, okay, I'm ready to start listening. So it's kind of a ping pong to initialize everything inside of my resident control-in. So I'm running this, And then, okay, I have this message, and you will see that this is not green yet. This is still gray. And why is that? That's because of this bug. This trigger has never happened. So control it in simply, it runs, it loads, as you can see, but it doesn't call Business Central. So actually AL. So AL never responds. And if I refresh this, you can see that it goes green. That's because there was no message. So you could just go on and I mean, the bug doesn't happen. So if you want, you can upvote the bug here on Microsoft's page. And yeah, it has been there for more than a month now. It has been submitted on December 14. It took them a while to confirm that it is a bug, but yes, that's what we have right now. So this affects all control-ins. If there is a message, no matter what it is, during initialization, and it can be this message about the license, or it can be something that you show, it will affect your control-in. If the control-in loads at the same time, it will just not call back to the AL. And yes, this is something new to Business Central 170. It wasn't present before. Cool. What is my next step? I want to really start listening to my key presses. So how do I do that? I will actually add some more code to my resident start listening function. So what I will do is I will actually create a new constant called on, or just key pressed. And this will be get AL method, and I'm just going to copy the name so that I don't make any typo. So I'm copying this and putting it here. So now I have my reference to a wrapper for on key pressed. And then what I want to do, I want to install a keyboard listener. And typically what you could do is you could say that document dot add event listener, and then you could just say key down or key up, maybe it would be better, and then event. And then you could do something like, let's start with alert key, and then I'm just going to show e.key. So that's just to start with, to see that it actually works and that it doesn't quite work as you expect. So let's take a look at what happens here. So I'm going to refresh my page again because this is not alive. And when I refresh, when I click here and I press a key on my keyboard, this happens. But if I focus somewhere else and then I'm really typing maniacally on my keyboard, but nothing is happening because this control-in listens to anything happening inside of this small iframe here, actually this one. And anything happening outside of it, I cannot listen to. Also, I cannot just, what I have to do is I have to essentially not hijack, but install my listener into every single document that is available in my application. So actually, there are more documents or more iframes in Business Central 170, or actually I think it was starting with 140. Everything was an iframe. So even the role center or any other user interface in Business Central was all an iframe. If you take a look at what we have in the background, you can see that I not only have an iframe for my control, but I also have here an iframe for the entire client. So what I need to do is I need to install a listener into all of those iframes and be able to listen to those keys. So how do I do that? I first have to obtain the reference of all frames. So it's window.top.document.query selector all, and I'm going to select all of iframes. And then I'm going to, for let frame of frames, I'm going to iterate through all of the frames, and then I'm going to do frame.content document because this is the document that I want to install the listener on. I'm going to do add event listener, and I'm going to listen to key up, and then I'm going to listen on this. And if I put this here, yeah, I'm just not going to demonstrate that, but this will actually show this alert dialog no matter where I am in Business Central. It will just capture every key press anywhere. So what I want to do now is I want to actually pass the data of this key press back to AL. And this data is, as you can see, a JSON object. I want to pass a lot of info about that. So I'm going to do const data equals, and then I'm going to store information about it, like key is e.key, and shift is E dot shift, shift key, and I'm going to have control is E dot control key, and alt is E dot alt key. So I'm passing information of what is being pressed currently. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call this key pressed, and I'm going to pass this info. So I'm just going to pass this data object back to AL. So what else I have to do? I have to actually start listening to that, not here. Here I have to create a new trigger, and on key pressed, I'm listening to this object, and then I'm going to need a text variable, so content text, and I'm going to read my JSON into that text. So I'm going to do event info write to content, and then I'm going to do message key pressed, and I'm going to simply show this content. Okay, so if everything was done correctly, this should now work. I should be able to simply see that a key was pressed no matter where I am. Right now, apparently it will not work because I'm still gray, but if I refresh and then press letter D, it tells me that letter D was pressed with no shift and no control. I'm going to do that with control, and then it tells me that shift is true, control is true. So this is fine. I now can see a lot of info about what was happening in the front end all the way back into my AL. And actually, if I click somewhere else, like not there, but somewhere here, and then press, let's say, letter E, it will tell me letter E was pressed regardless of the fact that this was not focused. Okay, I want to do something else. I want to actually, before I go on with anything else, I will also indicate in this inside of my my keyboard event listener, I'm going to indicate just a second. I'm going to set the class name to indicator on, and I'm going to explain why I'm resetting it back to on, because it has already been set to on. I'm doing it intentionally just in case to clear any other classes which might appear there in the meantime. And I'm going to set indicator dot inner text. My editor is not aware that this is actually of document element type, so I have no IntelliSense. So I will just have to put e.key, and what will this do is that when I press a key, it will actually show me which key was pressed. So I have to refresh, and then I can press D, and I get an event, and I press E, and I get an event. So it looks nice. I'm somewhere there, and this kind of looks like a resident controller, which should theoretically be available if I click, for example, sales orders, and then press letter D. What happens? Nothing. And funny thing is that it wasn't really nothing. Something did happen. And I'm now going to press back, and my hand is here, another is on my mouse, I'm releasing back, and now I have an event. It tells me that key was pressed, and that, you know, it also reflects this D here, and I can click sales orders again and press R, and then go back, and it will tell me that R was pressed now, and then it shows me R. So what is really happening? And this is funny, and this is what actually made me nearly cancel this session. Yes, this controller really is resident. It is alive out there, and it's not only alive, it's listening to everything. It's even calling AL code through the controller framework, but something else happens too. This is that the NST prevents any calls against a page which is not currently in focus. So if we are inside sales orders, yes, my controller is still listening. I press letter T now and going back. And yes, I get an event from the backend, and I get this updated here, but not synchronously with my event. What happens is that AL, or actually NST, will check, and it will see that my controller is actually not in focus. Actually, the page hosting controller is not in focus. There is something else on top of it, and it simply schedules all of the calls that will be made to that page to happen after this page becomes in focus again. That's why I had to press back and only then I would see things happening. And let's actually see that this is true, because if I start my tell me what you want to do feature and start typing here, I will look, for example, for customers. And you can see it has been updating all along. However, this means that the control-it-in works, and it was successfully calling AL, except that since this page or the entire row center is not in focus at this point, any calls were stopped by NST and scheduled to happen one by one after this page comes into focus again. So I close this, and let's take a look what happens. Okay, I have a metric crap load of messages, and they are all in actual order. So I have C, U, S, T, O, M, E, R, because I typed customers. So this is what is happening. So if you want to talk to your control-it-in, you need to be, or actually if you want your control-it-in to talk back to your AL, you need to know that all the calls that it places will be scheduled until after the page, which is no longer in focus, becomes focused again. And I can show you that if I go to custom sales orders and then I click a customer, and then I click, for example, I don't know, navigate, and then shipments, and then I'm in this page, I click this shipment, and then press letter P, and then go back and back and back and back, I get my letter P. So everything will happen, nothing will be lost. As soon as this page becomes focused again, all business logic will happen. Still, this may not be what you wanted to do. I mean, maybe you need things to happen synchronously. If you need that, well, you're out of luck in Business Central. The problem is, I've been doing this, and I don't know at what point, with which version it was that last I checked this thing. It was actually working. Your resident page was responding, and it was giving you events right away, no matter what was in focus. And I assume that with the latest updates of this modern client, of the web client, Microsoft has taken care to actually not allow those calls. This was an intentional design decision by Microsoft. So it's not an accident, it's not a bug. It is an intentional improvement in stability. Because otherwise, what would happen is that you could have a page which is not in focus, and this is not the main page, doing things on top of stuff that you are currently working on. So this is something that Microsoft probably intentionally wanted to prevent. So they did prevent that. However, as I said, the page is there and the control-it-in is there, and it does all of its work. It's not stopped. It is just not sending any calls back to AL. But can we call from AL? Can we call the page while it's not in focus? What will happen then? Let's actually take a look at that scenario. So for this, I'm going to need something else. I'm actually going to need to create another page, and let me start with a code unit. I'm going to create a code unit, and I'm going to call it resident. So what I want to do is from another page, I want to notify my control-it-in about something. To be able to share a control-it-in between pages, you need to have an intermediary object, a control-it-in, a code unit. So I'm going to create a code unit. I'm going to call it resident, and then I'm going to make it single instance. This is not the best solution, but I'm going to talk about this topic a bit more. I wanted to have 3 sessions. I think I will have only 2, but I'm going to talk about this single instance thing. So I'm going to set it to true, and I'm going to have a variable which will hold a reference to my control-it-in resident. And I'm going to have a procedure called initialize, which will receive another instance, or actually an instance of this control-it-in, and it will store this. So I receive an instance of control-it-in and I store it in my global variable. And then I'm going to have a method called procedure update. And then this procedure update will just call resident.update. I want to see if I can call my control-it-in and reflect what's happening in there while my page is not in focus. So what I need to do for that is I actually need to go into my resident file, and I need to create a function called update, because that's what the function name is. And what I will do here is a very simple thing. I'm just going to set indicator class name is indicator updated, and this will change the color. So not much, it will just indicate that the color has changed. And now so first thing, I need to go back to my page and I need to store the reference. So I'm going to use resident, this will be code unit, and I will store the reference. Yeah, I have to specify which one. So resident dot initialize, and I'm storing the reference to my control.in. So from that moment on, my single instance code unit holds a reference to the same control.in instance as my page. So when somebody calls this, it will actually call update on this instance. So this is what I want to do. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to have a pop-up page. I will just create a popup.page.al, and then I will do just page resident pop-up, and I'm going to make it page type is standard dialog. I don't want to do much on this page. I simply want to do trigger on open page. When this page opens, it will actually call my resident code unit, and it will call update. Cool. And then one more thing that I need to do is I need to it's resident.update. I have to go to my order processor role center, and I have to add another, actually an action. So I'm going to add the actions block. Yeah. And then I'm going to add after, and I'm going to add an action after, after this workflows. This is where I want it to appear. So I'm adding after workflows, and this is going to be an action which is going to be called pop-up, and it's going to be caption is resident pop-up, and application area is all, and I have actually not a trigger. I'm going to just have a run object is page, and then I will have my resident pop-up. So what I have done is I have created an action which will show my pop-up dialog. My pop-up, when it opens, will call my resident code unit. This code unit will in turn call my page, this one, and show and invoke a pop-up method on the control.in. This is the pop-up method, update method. Update method will call the update function in my JavaScript, and it will set the class name to something different that will show as a different color. So I wasn't able to talk to my control.in to my AL from my control.in in downstream direction. Can I do it upstream? So my page is no longer in focus. Will it receive updates from AL and sent from AL into JavaScript? Let's take a look. So I'm going to scroll down. It's obviously not loaded. I'm going to load it, and now I'm going to actually show my pop-up. And this has actually turned my my circle to orange, because that's what I actually made it do. I said, like, when this pop-up opens, call this control.in, and even though control.in is sitting in a page which is not in focus, a page which cannot talk to my AL, I'm still able to talk from AL to that thing in JavaScript. And yes, I can start typing here, and yeah, when I close, I'm going to have a lot of these to take care of, and yeah, that's it. So to wrap things up, it's actually, I don't need to present anything anymore. To wrap things up, yes, resident control.ins are possible. You would have to put them in your control in your role center, And yes, I have made one very visible. I could have made it 0 by 0 pixels so that I make a controller and really not show any user interface. It would. I just wanted to make it visual so that everything that happens is actually visible. And then that controller then would be able to respond to AL at all times, no matter when you call, but it would not be able to call AL at any time. So calls from AL to JavaScript are not scheduled, they are executed immediately, but all calls from JavaScript to AL are actually scheduled for execution until after your control.in becomes, or actually the page that hosts your control.in becomes focused. So that's what I have prepared for today. Let's actually just take a look at my my chat window. So yes, let's take a look. We managed to get past the initialization message bug by polling the page with add-in ready until it answers the add-in. Yes, that's nice, but this is just a workaround. I've also seen a couple of them, but this is just a workaround, and we should not be patching that. Microsoft should. So they said that they are working on that. Apparently they have accepted it as a bug. So yeah. Sebastian Klaus said that that sounds interesting in itself, but what do you need something like that for in practice? And are there any concrete examples of use? I've been thinking about it for some time now, but I haven't come up with anything useful. There's more comments from Sebastian. What I personally see critical, if you do it silently and secretly in the background, you could pick up all sensitive information. That can't be legal. So, well, I have presented key presses, not because I wanted to listen to them. One of the ways how I would have used it is, and that's something I presented at Tech Days a couple of years ago, is that you have a resident control.in where you actually listen to keystrokes, and then you could bind like actions to keystrokes, like you're in a page. And that was, remember, before Business Central Web Client had keyboard support for things. So you could actually start posting from a sales order page, which wasn't possible by keyboard back then, or you could start a custom action or have a configurable things that you want to happen when you press a key. It's not that you want to listen to this. This is something you should definitely not do. That would be illegal. But making it useful, like when a user press a specific key combination, like Control Shift F3, something happens that you want to happen. This is one of the use cases. Myself, I'm not really using this approach because to find a good use case for this, let me tell you one theoretical use case which I've ended up, I was looking into this approach, but I ended up solving it differently, was how do you, for example, communicate with local hardware? So you have, let's say, not a webcam that can be done with pure HTML and JavaScript these days, but for example, you want to, let's say, read a credit card reader from your JavaScript. So what do? Like, you need to communicate to that local hardware. So you may want to have a resident controller which is able to do that using WebSockets, for example, or something like that. So this is an example of when you would want to have something like that. So as I said, I wanted to have 3 sessions about this. The first session was this one, where I intended to actually present what resident control.ins are. The second session would be how to not use single instance code unit with that, and that will be the second session. So how to actually use a non-single instance code unit and still be able to actually talk between AL and JavaScript, or actually between AL objects without having to hold the control.in reference in a single instance code unit. So let's take a look at here. I have my resident code unit which holds a reference. So it has to be single instance. Single instance is not the best approach. I actually don't like single instances at all, and that's my last resort to anything. And I want to present how you can make it possible, for example, to call into the code unit which holds a reference without having to obtain that reference directly, or without this code unit having to be single instance. So that will be the topic for the next session. And then the third session was actually to present some real life use cases. And then, because of what I've discovered with Business Central that it actually schedules all of your calls. I'm not really sure I will be presenting that. I will let you decide what your use cases are. There can be a lot of use cases. Like what I wanted to present is, for example, you want to store an actual URL to the page that is currently being opened. You could do that with the resident control it in, or perhaps you could. There was another use case I wanted to present was, yes, when you are in a page and some other user modifies the record and you don't know that, and you start modifying the page, you would get that error message. And instead I wanted to show a caption in the page telling you, like, it doesn't cause an error, but it indicates in the page somebody else has changed this, so please refresh before you start editing, because that could save you from an ugly error. Perhaps this is just a couple of ideas, and whether or not I do that depends. I will see next week when I present this non-single instance approach. But yes, since I've been asked this question, how do you do a control it in, then I assume people do have this issue and they do want this some kind of a solution for that. Last one is if you have, let's say, this .NET WebAssembly loaded. This is something I wanted to present as well, but since you cannot talk from JavaScript back to AL, I decided not to present that use case because I don't see that as a viable approach anymore. It was a viable approach until a couple of versions back. Then I have a comment from Bjarki. The demo shows how you could set up custom global keyboard shortcuts, either built-in action triggers from your role center or even customizable in a table by user, for example. Yeah, I mean, if you really want to listen to shortcuts, I would do it by page. So I would simply add a control it into every page I want to listen to. It's easy through page extensions. You just create a page extension which hosts this listener, and then you expose some actions or actually some config user interface that will then map a key press to an action on that page. That is a way. I wouldn't use a resident control-in approach for keyboard listener. Michael Magel, thank you very much for your comment, Michael. Did you signal R to invoke events in Business Central components in SaaS tenant? And if yes, how did you fix the signal R cross-origin problem in SaaS? I didn't. I didn't use signal R from the front end. Your cross-origin will happen if you invoke signal R from the front end. I would be calling it from the back end, but I haven't used this with Business Central, so I would have to check. The general problem of invoking. And this was one of the use cases which was highly theoretical before you start thinking of what you could do. Like you could have a resident control it in which listens to something from AL and then it calls a web service, then responds back. A general problem with web services is that if you call them from the front end, you have the cross-origin issue, which means that the cross-origin issue, I mean, it's not an issue. It's a by design thing, a very useful thing in web, which prevents malicious calls. So you can, when a browser sends a call to a REST endpoint, it needs to identify itself. It needs to pass headers which make the REST endpoint aware that this is a browser call, and then it has to check the origins. The service itself may decide to ignore that and just to respond, but good web services like all of the Azure functions, including SignalR, like all of the Azure endpoints, will inspect your origin, and then they will see if this origin is allowed to place a call. So a browser will say, I'm calling from this domain, and then the backend will tell you, okay, I'm not accepting this domain. So Michael, this is what you have experienced, and I would imagine that you would have to configure your SignalR tenant to accept the origin that your calls are coming from, but I would myself not be calling them from the front end. Job Luage says, and actually Job, thank you for asking the question. You were the last guy who asked me about resident control a couple of months ago, and that's when I put this into my schedule. So you ask, if the NST queues the calls from JavaScript to BC, can you start a page background task that performs the things you'd like to do? Yes, you can, but if you do that task in the background in a response to JavaScript, that will be scheduled as well, so it will not happen. So the thing is that your trigger, and when I say trigger, this is the trigger that I have in mind. So this will just not be called before this page comes into focus. So that is the problem with with it. So if you want to start a background task here, that background task will not start until this actually executes, and this will execute only when the page is back in focus. And no, you cannot have a background task and share an instance of a control item because it comes from a different session. So you will not be able to do that. And even if you did, still that one will not be able to listen to this because the trigger can only live inside of the user control definition inside of the page that hosts it. So yeah, you will have problems. I'm not sure that you will be able to do what you intend to do. Bjarki says, I would rather assume the client queues them up. Yes, I think it's actually the NSD, but I'm not saying anything. I didn't look up at that, but I'm pretty sure it's the NSD which receives the call and then schedules that call. That comes from a discussion I had way back when I talked about some controller and things with Thomas Hasberg, who was an architect in Business Central team, who told me that calls are scheduled by NSD. And then, I would imagine that this is also the case now with the web client. Bjarki asks, would you think Microsoft is open to PR for SignalR client wrapper to the AL extensions repo? That beats me, like they probably are. And so if you create a pull request there and they are open for pull requests, if it works, if it passes their quality requirements and everything, I believe that they would be open to that. But still, would it solve all your problems? Would you not still have the same cross-origin issue? Yeah, or if you want to make kind of a back-end platform like pure AL using HTTP client, then maybe you wouldn't have that issue anymore. Would you implement SignalR in the backend? When you implement SignalR in the backend, how did you manage? I did not implement this in AL, so let's just put it straight. I did not implement SignalR. I did play with SignalR, but I did not implement it in AL. So how did you manage to hit and inform the front-end session of the user client? Yeah, sorry, I cannot answer this. I did not implement SignalR in the backend, so I cannot tell you. I don't know what is the hit and inform the front-end session of the user client. Michael, can you elaborate on this question? And it does sound like an interesting topic. Maybe I can cover that in the session. So the SignalR, okay, I see what you mean. Okay, let me try to wrap my brain around the question once again. You want to use SignalR to notify your web client about something, not to push events, right? Can you answer this question? So this is a sub-question to your question, or a counter-question. If you want to use SignalR to notify your front end, then I can imagine you would have these issues. So, and yes, then your back end, how would you do that? Yeah, I'm not sure. Yes, yes, I see what you mean. I cannot tell you this. I would have to try. I know what SignalR is. I did play with it, but I don't know all the intrinsics, and I would really have to try to play a little bit with it myself to be able to tell you exactly what happens and how I would approach. But this definitely sounds like an interesting topic, and it does take time for me to research into this. So I cannot just promise that it will be next week or week after that, but it does sound interesting, and I will try to cover that. So a promise is on I will try to, but there is no promise on I will. So yeah. Any more questions, guys, girls? So this is the first time in a long while that we have actual discussion after the session. So often it's just a couple of comments and very few questions, but Okay. What I've noticed is that my voice and actually my transmission is like 15 to 20 seconds behind, and then I should actually use this chat window. Okay, you showed us in 2019 how to decently debug JavaScript in VS Code with the React framework. I tried it, but it's complex to get started. Do you have any advice to simplify this debugging process? No, unfortunately, it is complex because if you want to start with React, first you have to have a toolchain which depends on something, and I myself use Webpack, and it's not the only approach, there are other approaches, but with Webpack, the approach I showed is with the Webpack, and the approach I showed involves setting up the build process, which builds your bundle file, which includes all of your React front-end stuff, and it also produces a source map that goes together with that bundle. And then I was using this source map to attach my client to that. Unfortunately, there is no easy or simple way to attach your VS Code to that. But I was thinking about these, like what else I will present, and I will definitely go deeper into debugging JavaScript code in control.ins, and I will definitely show a couple of ways how to use, how to actually debug from VS Code, how to debug your control.in code from VS Code. And there is another approach which I think I also presented, and I think it might have been in the same session as Gulp. You could configure Gulp to actually produce source maps for you. This is simpler. Still, it's not. You cannot really use Gulp with React, or at least not that I'm aware of a way that you can do that. HMR, whatever that is, plus AE2E, whatever that is, testing and mocking update would be fun to dive into again. Yes, I'm not sure what HMR or E2E. Yeah, so yeah, but I know that I owe this mock Business Central or AL mock and it sits there in my GitHub. There is a repo where the mock is available, and I did start, I think, 3 times last year. I've done like 25% of work to actually create a npm package out of it. That's my intention. And yeah, hot module reload and end-to-end testing. Okay, so hot module reload, I don't think that I actually switch off hot module reload whenever I'm programming in React, because it doesn't help me. I didn't find an easy way to actually make it work nicely with control.ins. But when I'm doing it with mock, then yes, it's different. Then it does help. And end-to-end testing, this is something I know I didn't promise, but I did scratch the surface of that when I talked about interfaces, and I said, like, I'm going to present how to test control.ins, or how to use control.ins framework to manage the stability. But this is not on my schedule yet. It does require some preparation, and I need to prepare demos. I just cannot sit here and improvise my way through that as I could today. So yeah. Well, I think we should actually call it a day or call it a session. I'm actually going to close this. Once again, thank you for attending. Please do not forget to subscribe to actually some of these directions. There is a subscribe button. Please subscribe to my video blog. Not that it actually helps a lot. I mean, I don't make money on this, but yes, you will be notified about when there are new things, and yeah, we can be in touch easier. So please subscribe. Please subscribe to notifications, and let me know what other topics that you would actually like to hear me cover. So next week I'm going to talk more about this. I'm going to present how to use single instance approach to exchanging control.in references between objects. And then the week after that, maybe I will talk about some real life use cases for resident control.ins, even though I'm not convinced of them that much anymore. And thanks for attending. Thanks for bearing with me, and see you in the next one. Bye.